So what is the future of this dinosaur? Do you feed the dinosaur what it wants? Rachmaninoff or Debussy or fish and chips or salad? Or do you just throw the cabbages at it and expect it to win the eating competition of the year and call it the foreign policy of the international piano player? Or do you wreck your institutions and say these institutions are not fit for the purpose? And indeed, if you are talking about the annexation of Scotland or the annexation of France, you would have to study your history, wouldn't you, over what they meant when they called Bonnie Prince Charlie with some affection, that maybe they knew the story of not Bonnie Prince Charlie of the 18th century, but they knew only too well the story of King Charles I, who had to come back from France at some tragic loss to himself when all was lost by 1649, but long before that. That at the end of the day, the pianist, the piano player, is more prone to the efforts of herself to attain a voice that they can call music. For the truth is that however much these other composers that have gone before us may be called great, if you do not understand the words of Lenin, you cannot understand what is true greatness, any more than if you have not read The Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo becomes even more blurred if you have not read that either, that you are almost starting to compare the two titles without even knowing the agenda. Indeed, for Alex Dumas, his publication of his work, which was in some collaboration in 1844, about the efforts of the average, shall we say, underdog. This dinosaur was put in prison in his story, and for falsely being accused of a crime which he did not commit, that he attained his freedom by the skullduggery of impersonation of a dead person, which has some pathos, doesn't it, in history, in that, you know, to be able to escape the science fiction movies, you have to reinvent yourself as some spiritual cloud of electrical conductivity, which is going to exude itself either into this new conceived Tyrannosaurus Rex, evolved from something or other, such as the butterfly is evolved from the caterpillar, or indeed it will be involved in something which is much likened in some science fiction to the proverbial turkey not being fit for the microwave oven because its seat was too big. Or you have studied the evolution of Parliament from the time of King Henry VIII, whose idea of Parliament, where it didn't really exist, was to appoint some churchmen on the basis that they were going to follow a particular ethos, such as Thomas Cromwell, and such as Thomas More. And if your wives did not agree with it entirely, then Catherine of Aragon would be put away in some place in Suffolk, and Anne Boleyn by 1536 would lose her head. You have to only acquaint what you can do for music when you study the like of, let us take the humble court musician, who goes about his business with a degree of aloofness, that, they say, yes, here he comes. Here he comes down to the pub to play the pub piano. This is the local dinosaur. Now, what can we give this dinosaur to eat? We will ask it if it can play anything of Mendelssohn. Or what about the spinning song? That seems to be from the time of the Industrial Revolution, doesn't it? You suddenly find that the idea of the church padre's idea of the spinning song is very different to the refugee, who was also as Jewish or more Jewish than Mendelssohn, who is fighting for freedom in their country. Their idea of the spinning song was perhaps more adjacent and more, shall we say, the revolution that was Nazi, despite having the hindsight of knowing what eventually happened to so many Jewish people in the Nazi era. At first, before 1922, and Hitler's incarceration, should I say, we haven't reached the stage of science fiction yet, have we? Where we can resurrect all these historical characters, bring them back, reinvent the butterfly, the special species of beautiful coloured butterflies. Well, you actually make these imprisoned artists, such as the Australian artist, I forget his name, who has been imprisoned for something which probably didn't do. But if you don't have the recourse to the law, how can you recall its basis of prosecution to any degree of justice? That is a question which the dinosaur, actually, if you think about it, because of the way it's evolved, the dinosaur is actually walking away from Parliament at the moment. It may appear not to be moving, but this dinosaur knows which direction it is best suited. But the danger is that there is no escape from this Count of Monte Cristo prison in some division of the long historic French colonies way spent abroad. But actually, if you look at the Count of Monte Cristo, it was in fact some 100 days before the release of Napoleon Bonaparte I from his exile in Elba, where he was then going back to fight for the freedom of France, which was very much then later misunderstood when later, some 20 years before, was misunderstood over those appointments and those successes on the Rhine, which were in a degree to try to amalgamate the principal resources of Prussia and France as a united. We don't want to refer to it, do we, as a United Nations now, any more than we want to refer to those grandchildren of, for instance, King Kaiser Wilhelm II of Prussia, who became Kaiser in summer 1888, and who was the leader of Germany, the new Germany, which was formed in 1861. When his father died, Emperor Frederick III, who was his mother's husband, who died suddenly with cancer. That we have the dilemma of, do you play the spinning song of Mendelssohn in the way of this Jew, or do you play it in the way of that Jew? And then, if you play All People That on Earth Do Dwell in the style of the Lutheran Church, are you maybe crossing the style of the of the spinning song or the all people that on earth do dwell in the style of Mendelssohn's spinning song maybe, for instance, has some implication with the Roman Catholic Church. That if you were, for instance, to play Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John, and your name was led to be, or at least the pianist you were listening to had their name, for instance, on the billing tonight we have the great Les Dawson. You know, and their picture was actually, for instance, just any pianist. Supposing their picture was that pianist that looked like Vladimir Horowitz, I forget his name, and I met him once, and unfortunately, a wonderful pianist, didn't die, wonderful performer, performed at the old Holborn Empire in the days when the theatre and Hutch. Have you heard of a pianist called Hutch, who was a great fan of the British monarchy and the royal family because of the efforts which had been achieved to in the names of freedom from the like of the immigration of the black people from indeed the colonies. But yes, we go back, don't we, to the degrees whereby what use are the old composers? What use is the spinning song of Mendelssohn any more than, for instance, the spinning song? There it is, we can always hear it, can't we? The spinning song of Franz Schubert, who was so tall in musical circles that it is alleged that his musical accompaniments even reached the Liverpool education of the Everyman Theatre, whose frequent renditions weekly by one of their musical directors, who shall be called Mein Gard, was having his accompaniments by, I can tell you, some worthy scholar, hopefully some desirous, earnest scholar, having his Schubert's accompaniments reconstructed. Gratefully, Schubert did not have to listen to them because Schubert was born in approximately 1810, at the time, or at least as contemporaneous time, as Chopin himself was born in 1810. That by the time you reach the 1844 and the time of the Count of Monte Cristo's publication in France, in fact the exile, as it were, of the refugee Frédéric Chopin was in some demise, forgive the pun, that Alex Dumas had his work effectively trivialized, in a sense, by the art of music, which, if you think about it, a few notes can create the whole essence in feeling of an entire novel. That when I watch and hear the performers on the net, even the ones that play you something, for instance, by whether it's Rachmaninoff or somebody else, and you think to yourself, oh, I've heard this before. The problem with hearing something again is that the danger is that the language itself does not improve, does not, if you like, you've seen one dinosaur, do you want to go, as it were, to the other zoo? For instance, you've seen one panda in the 1970s, wasn't it? I think it died in 1972, was a famous giant panda called Chi-Chi. Now, Dino Ferrari Bartolomeo here, this dinosaur, who, thank you for giving it such a warm welcome. The dinosaur is on its way from Parliament because it can't find a seat in Parliament. Yes. Oh, that's true.